let's dive deeper into types. So I heard from at least two of you that the covering of types I did in the introduction to TypeScript wasn't very well done. So I'd like to dive maybe for 5 minutes and just talk a little bit more about how they work, what they are, how to use them. Hopefully give you a better understanding since types are so fundamental and important in TypeScript. So let's go ahead and switch on over to the TypeScript Lang playground again. And in here, I've already prepared kind of just a little outline of what I'd like to cover today. We're going to start by defining 2 different types of types. We're then going to create a couple functions for submitting a pizza order, just as an example. And then we're going to actually call order intake to see a console log to prove that it's all working and understand a little bit more about how it works. So the first thing we want to do is define our toppings type. So to do that, we're going to start by typing type and then giving this a name, which we're going to call toppings. And so these are pizza toppings. And you might remember this from the previous video. So we can say toppings are a string. There are a bunch of string options. And so one of them would be pineapple. Don't cringe. I love pineapple on pizza. Love that sweet mixed with a nice little bit of spice from pepperoni. There we are. And I also like a bunch of meat, so I'm going to add some ham and some bacon, of course. And for my wife, she really enjoys green peppers. And she also occasionally likes jalapenos. Jalapenos. Am I even close there? I'm not actually sure. Jalapenos is what somebody would say. I don't think this is right. Copy, Control-T, Control-V, Google. It is an A. Good to know. Okay, I'm like jalapenos. There we go. And there's like a special N. I don't know if I can type that on Windows easily. Anyway, what you can see is you can add types. And, I've seen people put spinach on pizza. Although to me, that is just as bad as putting pineapple as it is for some of you. But anyway, there are some topping options. Now that we've made these topping options, let's talk about what this does. So first, we're declaring a type called toppings, which means we can utilize this somewhere else in our script to say that we want to receive a topping value, which then says it has to be one of these strings. So it has to be one of these options. Now there's obviously a lot more detail you could do here. I'm pretty sure you can like mix and match numbers and other options in here. But this is one way of declaring a type. There's a second way to declare a type, which is using a JSON object. And we do that by typing, just like before, type, and then the name of it, which is order data. And that's going to be equal to curly braces, in other words, a bag of stuff, or more technically, a JSON object. So we're saying order data is going to hold a bunch of different things in it. And inside of order data, we're going to put some kind of things you'd put in for an order, which would be like the person ordering, so the name. So we'll call that the order name, and that will be a string. And so you can see here that we've said the first parameter in this JSON object is called order name, and it's of type string. We use comma-separated values inside of here, so we then hit Control-C, Control-V to duplicate the line. I definitely recommend putting it on separate lines so it's easier to read through. This one I feel like it's okay because it's kind of just like a list of things, and but if you needed to, you could separate this onto separate lines as well. But anyway, our next value we're going to have in our order data is going to be the toppings themselves. So if we type toppings, you can have multiple toppings on a pizza. So it is a of type topping. So you can see the toppings type has appeared. And then we want it to be multiple. So right now it can only be one, but if we add square brackets, now it's an array of toppings, meaning we can have multiple toppings. And then we're going to declare a price, which would be a number. And so we can say there's a price. We also want to know what time the order was placed. So we'll call this the order placed at, which will also be a number. And I think just to add one additional parameter so you can see just a little bit more depth to this, we'll add something called is specialty, which would be a Boolean. And for now, we don't really have specialty pizzas, but let's imagine that there's some parameter for is specialty, which could mean something else somewhere. And so you'll remember that a Boolean means true or false. So it can either be is special or not is special. Okay. With all of that set up for our order data, we can now utilize that in our script. So we're going to define a function called order intake. And so one of the things that we like to think about is like, what is the goal? And so our goal right now is to be able to place an order and it gets added to a list of orders. So you can have more than one order at a time. And then logging that order to the console will allow us to see that. And then in a video game that you're developing, you might use this to apply specific toppings, or maybe the order time determines how long it's going to take to cook or when it's going to pop out of the oven, that sort of thing. So you can definitely use all this information in various ways, but for now we're just going to log it to the console as a demonstration. Okay, so this order intake is what's going to allow us to add an order. So we'll say order intake, and order intake is a function, which I forgot to write at the beginning, so we type function. And so our function is named order intake. The parentheses is where we put parameters that are received. We will not be returning anything, so we won't type a colon here. We'll then use curly braces, and this is where the code goes that is the function when the function runs. And inside of our order intake parentheses for our parameters, we need to be able to create an order data. So we need to receive this information. So we need the name of the person ordering, which is a string. We need the is specialty Boolean, so we type Boolean. We need to know the toppings, which we remember is a toppings array, so square brackets. We need to know the price, which is a number. And I think we should calculate the price. Oh man, that would be so much fun, but I think we should stay on task. And then we need to know the order place stat, which we're going to determine inside of this function, because this function does have access to date.now, which gives us the current time. So now that we've got our parameters set up, and I'm just going to read through that one more time, hopefully that clears anything up here. So we have the function called order intake. When you call this function, you need to pass in the parameter's name, which is of type string, the is specialty Boolean, which is a true or false value, the toppings, which is an array, so a list of these strings, which have to be of type toppings, the price, which is a number, and now we can say constant current order equals, and so we're now defining a current order. But before we define it, I mean, we could put curly braces there, but I'm going to backspace this. We need to tell it that current order is of type order data, and then we can say equals curly braces. And then we get this red squiggly, which if we hover over it is telling us that we're missing all the properties from order data, like an order name, is specialty, and so on. And so what I usually do is just copy paste from up here, but we're going to fill this out manually. So we just type order name, colon. This is then going to need to reference the name from our parameters. So we just type name and then comma, because these are comma separated. Then we have the is specialty, colon, and that's the is specialty parameter. And so I know these have the same name, which can feel confusing, but the first one is the property, and you can hover over it to see that, whereas the second one is the parameter. And so this is able to identify correctly, even though they have the same name. So don't worry about that. Next up, we have our toppings, which is going to represent toppings as well, so the same thing there. The price is going to be our price from above. And finally, our order place stat. Now, I didn't want to write this one in because I still wanted to hover over current order just to show you that when you look at this now, it says order place stat is missing type. Oh, I thought it was going to specifically call out order place stat. Interesting. Oh, it says order place stat is missing. Okay, it is saying that. So right here at the beginning. The point is when you hover over it, it is a lot of data right there to kind of parse through, but that first value there is telling us what we're missing. So we can now be like, oh yeah, right, forgot to add that in. Order place stat is going to be date.now. And date.now returns the amount of milliseconds since the epoch. And so this is a fantastic way to track time. I recommend just using this value and not trying to convert it into some custom value unless you need it to be displayed to the user. Behind the scenes, it's very easy to use just simply date.now. And then everywhere you use this, you can calculate the milliseconds. And if you need it in seconds, just divide by 1,000. So, all right. Now that we've created this current order, we need to submit the order or add the order. So we're going to create another function, which is going to be called submit order to cooks, like to chefs, to back, might make sense. So we'll then put in parentheses, and the parameter we want to receive is an order data. So we say new order is of type order data. Then we can use our curly braces, and this is where we're going to run code. And then back in our order intake, we can now call submit order to back. So we'll then type submit order to back, parentheses, passing in the current order, and then semicolon at the end. And now that we have this submit order to back, calling current order, over here, we want to console log this, console.log the current, or excuse me, what was that called? That was the new order. So we want to console log this to see it on the console that it did come through. And I recommend when using a JSON object that you put an additional layer of parentheses around it and then call JSON.stringify, which is just an easy way to convert a JSON object into a string. And so if we wanted to, put some information in here, like we could say single ticks plus, and then inside the single ticks we would write new order colon space, and then that will have the information. Whereas if we didn't have JSON.stringify, it would just say that there was an object there. I'll show you both ways. So we'll hit Control-C, Control-V, and then we'll remove this just showing new order. And I'm pretty confident that's going to just show object. So we'll call this new order without stringify, so we can see that later. Okay, so now that we've got this console log ready, we do want to have an array of order data, which allows us to know all the orders that are currently being processed. So right above this is where I'm going to create a new constant called current orders. And current orders will be of type order data array, meaning it's a list or an array of order data, which is then equal to an empty array. And then as this submit order to back comes in, we can then say current orders dot push parentheses the new order. And depending on how your script is set up, you might already be processing a current order or be checking once every 5 seconds for new orders to come in. So maybe there's some loop that's looking at this array of data. And if I was making a world in Horizon, I'd put this in like a data file, which is something we'll learn more about as we progress further into the series. But yeah, current order is just going to store all the orders. But if you needed to, you could also do something here to tell chefs, i.e. print new ticket, right? So somehow you need to tell the back. And so we're adding it, we're telling the back in some way, and then we're console logging just so that we can see something happening here in our script. Now, if I roll back up to the top, the last thing we want to do is call order intake to see this whole thing being used. And so I'm going to clear that out. And now at the very bottom, we can just call order intake, parentheses. And so you can imagine somewhere you've built an order form, and you've taken all this information, and then that's submitted. So order intake is being called here just because we don't have like a trigger or something like we would in Horizon, but just for the demonstration today, this is okay. And you'll note that because we're calling a function, none of this code above is like code that runs other than this line 27 for current orders. And so we could have put this at the beginning, we're going to put this at the end. Anyway, but the order of this doesn't necessarily matter. All right, now in order intake, we need to provide the name of our person placing the order, which is going to be myself, Lakes. We then want to say, is it specialty? We're going to say false. This is going to be a custom pizza. The toppings, we're going to do square brackets, and then we can have some toppings. Now, if you were in VS Code, typically when you type single ticks, it's going to give you a drop-down list for all of the options. In the TypeScript playground here, we're not seeing that, but what you will see is if I type a P, it returns everything with the P in it. So I can add some pepperoni, I can do a comma-separated list here. So then we'll add some pineapple. And those are kind of like my go-to, but you know, if I'm feeling real extra, I like to add some bacon. And if I'm going all out, I'll add some ham. And I can't believe I just forgot this. Sausage is another topping. I feel so bad, but these are like, ooh, I'm like, yum. My wife wants some veggies on there, I can tell you that much is for sure. All right, so now that we've declared this pizza for Lakes, we need some more information like the price. And we can just type in a number. So if I was making the price, I'm gonna set it to $0, which is where I would recommend probably calculating the price somewhere else along the line rather than passing it as a parameter. So if we come up here, it's very easy to change this. So we'll delete price, and instead we'll say price is equal to, we'll start at $7.50. So we say 7.5 plus, and then put parentheses here just to clarify the order of operations, even though order of operations does apply. And then we'll take $2 multiplied by each topping. So we take toppings dot length to know how many toppings there are, and then multiply that by 2, and that's how much we're going to increase it. So in my case, there's 5 toppings, so it should be $17.50. And so now we got this dynamic price calculator. Very simple, obviously, in this case. And now that we're ready to run the code, we can just hit the run button. And we can see there was a new order placed. And here, oh, like I said, new order without stringify, you get this object, whereas new order with stringify, we get order name, Lakes, is specialty, is false. Interesting. Oh, I need to expand this. Let's see. I'm like, why am I not seeing the rest? Order name, Lakes, specialty, false, toppings, pepperoni, pineapple, bacon, ham, sausage, price of 17, and the order was placed at this time in milliseconds. And there you go. So pretty neat. I hope that's helped explain kind of, you know, types, how they're used, and a little bit more like a real concrete example here. I'd encourage you to like play around with this, maybe make some of your own changes, add some new parameters, or if you really wanted to go and like try to add something extra, maybe create a specialty type, and then you can specify the specialty type, and maybe there's a price associated with. I mean, that would be way too hard for this level that you're at. But you could do a type of specialty type, and then if specialty is true, they can pass an additional specialty name in, and it could be. That one's a little bit harder, but if you want to give it a go, I would definitely say give it a try, adding a specialty name. So anyway, have fun, and let me know how this has helped you out. There was one last thing I was going to say, going camera on for this one, I guess, which is something that's I think is relevant when we're talking about type. We should talk about how types are interpreted at the end of the day, because we're in TypeScript. Now TypeScript, as of today, compiles into JavaScript, and JavaScript doesn't have types. And so when TypeScript is compiled, it removes all of the types that you've written in. And what types are for, therefore, is to make us write cleaner, safer code. And so the point is you don't necessarily have to have, like toppings could have been a string array, but what if you mistyped a P as lowercase rather than capital and it caused something down the line to mess up? Types make us write better code. It's what I love about TypeScript. So just know that the typing system is for like when you're in VS Code and you're coding, and you probably will never get into TypeScript compilation to JavaScript. I do it a little bit on my side because I'm developing an app with TypeScript built in. But if you looked at the compiled JavaScript, there's no types in there. So I think that's just worth saying. But if that doesn't make any sense to you, you can just, was it click? The pen click? There you go. All right, I will catch you guys in the next one. Hope this helps, and I would love to hear feedback. See you on Discord, see you in the YouTube comments. Bye!